Hello and welcome to the Unlocking Behavior Change podcast, the show all about psychology and changing behavior. My name is Jamie West, and we have a very special guest today who is our guest every time we do the podcast. It is Professor Emeritus Robert West. Hello.
Hello. Doesn't stop me being special, I guess.
Well, you did have a very special birthday recently.
I did. The big 70.
Well, I'm no mathematician, but that's 70. How was it?
It was good. It was very nice. We were in Portugal, in my pretty much favorite place on the planet, just outside Lisbon. And the weather was lovely. The people were lovely. The vibe was lovely. Food was lovely. Slight issue, I have to say, which was that I had a small abscess under a tooth, which meant that I had to take antibiotics. Though I wasn't in a great deal of pain, but I had to take antibiotics, one of which was metronidazole. And metronidazole is a chemical or a drug that they give to alcoholics to stop them drinking. Because if you drink any amount of alcohol while you're taking metronidazole, big tip here for you folks out there, it makes you feel unwell. So I couldn't drink alcohol.
Did you resist drinking alcohol, or is that what made you feel ill?
I didn't feel ill because I didn't drink alcohol.
Oh, it was the abscess.
It was the abscess. Yeah. Anyway, no, it was happy to take antibiotics. Anyway, all is well now.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and happy birthday.
Thank you.
And I do need to make a correction. I'm sure people will have been screaming at the last episode when I got the name of the chocolates that I eat wrong. I called it Le Petit Prince or something like that, but it's actually called Le Petit Chocolat. And I still have only just eaten one. I can still taste it in my mouth. Anyway, so we haven't solved that addiction yet. I blame you.
Yes. Well, to be fair, that's not the only mistake that you and I have made in the course of these podcasts. So, what are you going to do?
What are you going to do? I'm sure we can have a whole podcast dedicated to mistakes we've made, not just in the podcast. We'll go back.
Yeah.
Anyway, this first season is focused on decision making, and we've introduced the FACET framework, which is a framework to help us understand decisions and break decisions up into different components. And just as a recap, you don't have to go back and listen to the previous episodes, but you can if you want to. So it's called FACET, and it stands for framing, assessing, comparing, enacting, and timing. And last time we did framing, and we went through a whole load of stuff about how important it is to frame a decision in a helpful way, and how often you have to reframe decisions as you go along. But today we're going to be moving on predictably to assessing. Looking forward to this, Robert?
Yep. Lots to talk about.
Okay, well, let's get right into it. So what is it? What is assessing?
So you've got to the point in the decision where you've asked the decision question. That's your frame. What shall I do? Shall I do this or not? Which of these things shall I choose? And now, obviously, you're looking at the options that are in front of you, and you're trying to figure out what the best course of action is. And there are two main ways that we do this. One is a kind of pros cons analysis. For each of the options, we look at the option, and we say, what are the good things about that option? What are the less good things? What are the bad things, negative things about that option? And we do that for each of the options under consideration. So this is the classic pros, cons, cost benefit type analysis, which is the basis for so much of decision theory, including economic theory. And we'll come to this in a minute, but models such as subjective expected utility theory, in which you focus on pros and cons in terms of what things might happen in the future that would be good or bad. Okay, it's pros, cons.
Well, before you carry on, I just want to get it into some kind of concrete example that people can understand. Behind you, you have a bunch of guitars. I have a bunch of guitars. Would you be applying this pros, cons to buying guitars?
Generally, yes. So let's say that we are in a guitar shop, which is not unknown for it to happen. Often when I'm going in thinking I'm just going to buy a plectrum or something and come out with a £2,000 guitar, if I'm not careful. Anyway, so you're in there. Let's say you have decided that you're going to buy a guitar and you're choosing among the guitars. Then in a pros cons type of analysis for each of the guitars, you would say, okay, what are the positive features about this? What are the less good features? And for those of the listeners who are guitarists, they will know that there will be things like, what's the action? How high are the strings from the from the fingerboard? What does it look like? What is the sound from the different pickups? What is the feel, the weight, the balance of the guitar? What is the make of the guitar? Because I think some of us who are a bit old-fashioned think of Fender and Gibson and guitars of that era as the classics, and that probably weighs into the decision a bit. And then on the other side, you've got things like cost and so on. So you would weigh these up, and then you would come to a decision based on some kind of comparison, which we will cover in the next episode. But in order to make the comparison, you have to look at these pros and cons. So that would be one example. Another example would be where you're trying to decide, let's say, on a candidate for a job. And each of the candidates has strengths, and they also potentially have limitations. This candidate might have a lot of experience, but they might be weak on something like teamwork or whatever. So you're weighing up the good and the bad features of those options. If you're focusing on a decision where you're very forward looking, you're thinking about what's going to happen as opposed to the attributes of the options you've got available to you. A gambling decision, for example, or let's say an investment decision, which is the same as a gambling decision in a way. You're looking at the stocks and you're trying to predict what is likely to happen in the stock. What are the probability that the stock is going to grow or produce a particular dividend over a particular time period, and you would look at, for example, a stock that you think might grow quite considerably. It's a startup or it's a new kind of company. Or it's in a new area, but also there's potentially a high risk. So you've got the costs and the benefits in terms of expected outcomes, positive and negative. That's the pros and cons analysis.
And so in some of these options, assessing them, some of them, the future is quite clear. So if you buy a guitar that, let's say, it is worth £2,000, as you say, well, you're going to lose £2,000 and you're going to gain a guitar.
Correct.
That's quite standard. You don't know how much that guitar will increase or decrease in value over time. That's something that you don't know about, because something like a guitar is not something that, unless you sort of burn it like Jimi Hendrix, they actually have a value. But I don't know. I bet you could... I wonder how much it would cost to buy a
burnt guitar.
A burnt guitar. How burnt? Was it just the ashes? Whereas you might have an investment, like you're saying, where actually, it's pretty speculative from the outset. You may get less back than you put in, as the adverts like to say.
Yeah. So within the pros cons analysis, then what you've highlighted there is there's two types of sort of subtypes of pro-cons analysis. One is the sort of consequentialist one, like subjective expected utility theory and the various models that are like that, where you're forward-looking. You're looking at the probability that various things will happen. Some things are definite, some things are not so definite, and then for each one, if it were to happen, what's the positive and negative value that you'd attach to that? That's the expected, what they call an expectancy value type theory. And And then there's other decisions where, as you say, it's not really about the future or about probabilities. It's about things that you like and don't like about the options, or things that you know are going to be, or you feel are going to be good or bad about the options. And that is captured by a type of theory or model called multi-attribute utility models. So one is expectancy value models, and the other is multi-attribute utility models. And those are two types of pros cons analysis.
So those names, for people who haven't heard them before, can be quite intimidating. I've heard them many times and I still slightly drift off during the saying of these names. Subjective expected utility. I think we did talk about that a bit on a previous podcast, and then multi-attribute. But it's worth just doing a quick rundown of those in simple language. Imagine that you're talking to me.
Yeah. So expectancy value theories such as subjective expected utility theory or models of decision making are models in which you think that the person is, for each of the options, they're looking at what the possible outcomes might be. They're evaluating the likelihood that each of those things are going to occur and how much they like or don't like them. And they put all that together into a single value, which is the expected utility of that particular option. And then they compare the expected utilities of the different options. And there's lots and lots of different ways of doing that, and lots of different theoretical ideas about how we evaluate things and come up with different probabilities. So that's that. The other one, the multi-attribute utility approach, is a one in which you're assessing the known or believed features of a particular option, and then comparing those features according to how important you think they are. Let's take an example for that. Another example of that one, which would be, purchasing decisions are very often like this. Buying a car. So the features might be that you're looking for might be fuel economy. They might be the price of the car. They might be the color. They might be the style. They might be the presence of particular features, air conditioning. Things like what kind of information does it present on the dashboard? Comfort of the seats. Those are all things that are features of the car that are more or less important for different people, and different cars have those features to differing degrees. And there the models propose that you somehow aggregate all these features. You put them together so that you get a general sense for this car that you're looking at, that it's quite nice. It's very, it's got certain features. It's not perfect, but it's got certain features. For that car, it might have other features, and you make your comparison on that basis.
And when shopping online, there are very often tables, aren't they, comparing similar models, be it a car, be it a Fitbit or a smartwatch, whatever, saying it does, this one is waterproof, this one, a tick and an X or something next to it. And it will say, what's the battery life? This is 10 hours, this is 30 hours or whatever.
Exactly.
So what this theory... And it's only a theory, right? It's not how we actually behave, is it?
Well, what is it? It's a model rather than a theory. Oh my God, what's the difference between a model and a theory?
No, we'll do an episode on that later.
It's a way of looking at it so that you can make predictions about what people are going to do.
What's that? Is that a model or a theory?
That's a model. A theory would be a proposition, would be a type of model which seeks to explain things in terms of things that you can't actually directly observe, but you believe to be there.
There's this amazing bit. There's a fantastic cricket documentary that follows the Australian cricket team and their coach. I'm going to misquote it, but it's something like this, where the coach is getting fed up. Justin Langer is getting fed up with his players, and they've all got these ideas about how to go and play. And at one point he says something like, "You're not good enough to have a theory." Anyway, eventually, I don't think that Justin Lang, he's not the coach anymore. I think he had quite a hard line approach at times, so they switched him out. But I always think of that when I think of theory. Are you good enough to have a theory?
That's a very, very good meme, actually. I think some of us out there who have theories probably would be well advised to reflect on, are we good enough to have a theory?
Okay. I guess the point I was getting at really was that we don't really do calculations in our minds, do we?
Yeah, that's right. That's why it's more of a model than a theory. It's not saying, people actually do this. It's saying it's as though we do this. If we kind of model it as though we did all this stuff, then we can make predictions about what decisions people are going to end up with that are more or less accurate. And so if you say, let's take, the classic expectancy value model, which is subject to expected utility theory, it would be, the model that it comes up with is people assign a subjective probability to each of the possible outcomes. They assign a utility to that, which has or a value, whether they like it or don't like it, on some scale. They multiply the two together. Then they add up all the ones for the different possible options, and that gives them an expected utility score. Well, obviously, no one does that. So it's as though they do that. It's like they're doing something a bit like that, but it's obviously not that. But nevertheless, it doesn't do mostly a very bad job at predicting behavior. It can get you part of the way. So it's not a hopeless model.
Well, how about this? I sometimes watch chess channels, and when they're talking through the next move you should make, they sort of put a puzzle on the screen and say what you should do. They sometimes say, what are some candidate moves that you could do? And chess is obviously a closed system, so it can be more almost mechanical in how you do it. So you can look at each move. You can take, maybe I'll, move my pawn over here, or I'll move my knight here. And then you can say, what will my opponent do in that case? And then I'll do this. So they call it following the line through.
Yeah, so that's right. And the tricky thing there is that, of course, most chess players, amateur players, don't assign utilities or values to particular chess outcomes that might or might not occur. They have a general sense that this is probably quite a good position, but chess grandmasters do have a strong intuitive sense of this, and chess programs do actually assign values to every chess position based on a certain number of features. So this chess position has features which will be to do with what pieces you've got compared with the opposition, where those pieces are located and how they're configured, and things like control of the center and so on. So that would be an example of where a simulation, a chess computer model, is crunching the numbers and doing it. The human being isn't crunching numbers as such, but they do have a sort of intuitive sense. And in a way, you can think of models like subject to expected utility theory as like the chess computer. It's putting numbers to things that we have an intuition about.
Right. So in those instances, there is a kind of a number you could put on something, but in many decisions, maybe most decisions in our lives, that number, you could put a number on it, but it wouldn't be a kind of relatively accurate number, which the chess machines are quite accurate.
It wouldn't be an accurate number, and it wouldn't have a scale as such. What is it, 1 to 10? 1 to 100, minus 100 to plus 100. It's an but if you are to put numbers on it, you have to. There's a big degree of arbitrariness in it, and that is one of the problems when you're modeling decision making using this sort of approach, is that it can be quite sensitive to arbitrary decisions that you have to make about the sort of scales that you use.
Okay, so what else? I know that you're keen on assessing options, I should say. What else did you want to talk about? I mean, I've got a list here.
Yeah. We've covered so far is the pros cons, right? With the multi-attribute utility, which is assessing the features, expectancy value theories, which is looking at the probabilities of potential outcomes. The other really whole area of decision making that is very different from that in the way we assess options is pattern matching and using if-then rules. And so the whole assessment process you have if you're trying to understand how you or other people make decisions, you have to start by thinking in the assessment process, are they doing a pros cons analysis? Are they doing a pattern matching type of analysis, if then rules type analysis? Or are they sort of mixing and matching a bit between them? Because that will have a critical influence on what decisions people come out with in the end. And in the pattern,
what is pattern matching?
So the pattern matching one will be a decision of the kind: if this is true, that is true, and that's true, and that's not true, then do this. Or this would be a good thing to do. An example of that would be the sort of diagnostic decisions that clinicians might make. So they're looking at particular features. A patient comes in with a set of symptoms. So these are things that are kind of like, is it there? Is it not? How bad is it? Or whatever. And based on how well those symptoms fit a particular pattern for one or more different diseases, and based on the history of the patient, what they've had in the past, possibly what their family history is, the doctor would come up with a diagnosis, or either a full, clear diagnosis or a tentative diagnosis, and then they would say, right, we've got these options which we can use to treat it. And if with this set of symptoms, I suggest you do this, you choose this, antibiotics or antivirals or whatever. So that kind of decision making is also incredibly common, particularly in professional environments, where you've got a lot of other people's experience to guide you in terms of what the best thing to do is.
Right. So they just have so many patients, not just coming through their own clinic, but there's a whole body of research that has studied what works, what doesn't work, what works a bit, what you might try if the first thing doesn't work.
Yeah.
And people present a mixture of symptoms, and they'll go, actually, maybe that headache is not relevant, or maybe the cold that you've got at the moment, that's not relevant.
Yeah.
And so we ignore that bit from our list of symptoms, and we go, well, actually, if we ignore that, then we'll give you these antibiotics, 2 weeks of that.
And so that's a whole different way of approaching the assessment problem. And one of the issues you've got in the decision-making research literature is that the people studying the pattern matching type approach tend not to integrate this terribly well with the pros cons approach. So they go down different pathways, and the studies that are done follow different silos, I suppose, or fall into different silos. And one of the things that we want to do, you and I, Jamie, in our book on Decision Making Reflect, is to help people to integrate these, to figure out when people use the pattern matching approach, when they use the pros and cons approach, and when they go from one to the other, because you can also mix and match a bit.
So I'm interested in this mixing and matching of your pros and cons and pattern matching. Where might we do that?
I think an example would be quite often, if you start with a pattern matching approach and it's not delivering what you want in terms of a clear answer, or it's delivering an answer that you're not happy with. Let's take an example of a pilot who gets a warning on the flight display saying that there's an engine fire. In that situation, they're not going to go through a pros cons approach. What's the best thing to do here? Shall I, should I sort of shut down the engine or whatever? They go through a checklist, the engine fire checklist, which is a pattern matching approach, and say, right, okay, where am I in the flight envelope? Have I just taken off? Am I in cruise? Am I coming into land? Whatever, and based on that, they could then, in theory, start to make a decision about what the best thing to do is. However, there may be some exceptional circumstances which would mean that, oh my God, if I follow the recommended approach, that could cause unwanted consequences or side effects that I then have to weigh up against the fact that, yes, I have successfully put the engine fire out. However, as a result of that, because of the situation we're in, we may well end up in a worse position than we would otherwise have been. So you then switch from a sort of a recommended approach to some other approach, and you apply your pros cons analysis to that approach.
Right. So you first of all go through a checklist, and then maybe you think, actually, if I follow this all the way through, it's going to cause unintended consequences. And you think, what are my other options? And then you pros and well, what's the pros of that? What's the cons of this? And then you go through it. So I can see how you may be using both. I'm very interested in pattern matching, partially because we love to spot patterns. We all know that human beings like to spot patterns where maybe we see faces where there aren't really faces, arguably. We see faces in soups and in foods, and that's just the way our brains are wired. But I'm quite interested in how we can often make mistakes. Other ways we falsely pattern match. We think, oh, this is just like that. We kind of snap to it. It's kind of, we make a connection, and before we've really even challenged it or interrogated it, it can form into a belief. This person who I've just met, they remind me of someone else I met who was horrible 5 years ago because of the clothes they were wearing or something. You think, actually, maybe that person's horrible. Little things like that, but we do it all the time.
Yes, and that would be an example of where our heuristics and biases, another huge area of research, would come into play, of which probably one of the most important ones that people face is confirmation bias. And oh my goodness, it is so strong. I cannot overemphasize how strong confirmation bias is, to an extent where that something could be right there, right in front of your eyes, and you don't see it because you're expecting something else. There's a very good example of that unfortunately, in the aviation world, which, as you know, I study quite a lot, in which a plane was expecting to see the lights of a runway. It saw lights, thought that it was the runway. There was lots of evidence that it wasn't a runway. It had the wrong color lights and things like that. But they were expecting to see a runway. They thought the lights were a runway, wasn't a runway, crashed the plane. And, there's many, many examples of this. And in our everyday life, it's so prevalent. I would say probably, this may sound a bit strong, but I think that probably not a day goes by where each of us isn't subject to some kind of error as a result of confirmation bias.
Oh, yeah, I would expect so. How could you avoid that?
Yeah,
almost.
Yeah, and it's not that the reason why we have these expectations is because of our limited processing capacity. We can't be analyzing everything all the time, and so our brains jump forward and they fill in the gaps, and just perception is hugely involves filling in the gaps. So it's not that the process that leads to confirmation bias isn't a powerful and a useful process. It's just that you've got to be terribly careful and aware of its existence, and careful that you fall into it as little as possible.
Yeah, it's a really useful thing to watch out for when you pattern match. And I think I see this a lot in terms of how people pattern match historical events and political events. And you think, this budget or something reminds me of one from the 90s, therefore it will have the same result. Or it can be quite easy. It's just an easy trap to fall into. I think it makes us feel secure. We think, actually, this new event has occurred, but it's happened before, and therefore we maybe can predict what will happen. So we're not feeling quite so uncertain.
I think confirmation bias arises from a number of factors, one of which, as you say, is the need for a predictable world, and to feel that the world is predictable and that things happen that we expect to happen. Part of it is just simply part of our perceptual and cognitive apparatus. It's what we do, filling in the gaps. It's not arising from any need to do anything. It's just that the brain has filled in the gaps, and you haven't noticed that it's done it in a way that actually doesn't fit the evidence. And one thing I would say to people, always to be on the lookout for, is if there's some bit of information out there that doesn't fit, don't just ignore it. Don't just ignore it. Don't think that's what happens. Is you got your uneasy feeling. Well, hang on a minute, that doesn't fit. But anyway, whatever. Pay attention to that, because that is your cue that tells you your expectation is wrong.
So don't ignore the outlier. And it may mean that it just warrants a little bit of extra investigation and you carry on with what you were doing anyway.
Yeah.
But it's worth looking into the outlier.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Right. Okay. So we're sort of coming up on time for this episode. I don't know. It feels like there could be more to say on assessment, maybe in another episode.
There's so much more to say. There's issues around comparing chalk and cheese in the pros cons analysis, for example. How on earth do you compare things when they're so different? What about what happens when there are no good options? That's a really common situation. How do you address that? And so I think we will come back to it. And, there's lots of really good research to draw on.
Brilliant. Well, I very much look forward to that. This has been very enlightening, and our first episode with you over the 70 mark.
Mm-hmm.
So all faculties seem to still be working, which is encouraging.
70, I'm not going to say it. So I was going to say 70 is the new 60, but I'm not going to say that.
Yeah, you could say it's the new 50.
Well,
you just give yourself a bit more time.
Garmin watch says that my fitness age is 57, which frankly I find quite insulting. because
Insulting?
because I do a lot of exercise. I think I'm actually fitter than that, but still.
Well, I think 57 is pretty good. But anyway, well, thank you so much for listening, everybody. And remember to like and subscribe and review the podcast. And links for our books will be in the description. And we very much look forward to being with you next time on the Unlocking Behavior Change podcast.